I guess I still live. Hello everybody, I'm back. Nice to see you all. So I love to talk about like AUs and stuff. I have plenty of AUs that I've just never shared with people because I am incredibly anxious and also want to give a full picture and actually be able to think out my thoughts instead of just struggling constantly. I have now decided though that I'm just going to talk about AUs here on my YouTube channel and just share what I know, for fun. And I will be starting with my Welcome Home AU, specifically the Monster House AU, which has no association with any real Monster House movie, show, or whatever, okay? That's just what I call it for simplicity's sakes, and I have no idea what else to call it. However, before we get into the video, I do want to talk about something. I feel like most of my, followers, subscribers, whatnot, follow me for my MCYT content. It's one of the things that blew me up the most, and I don't entirely want to betray these people. And I had a cool idea, so I feel like I've mentioned it here before, at least briefly, that I made these little guys, these little designs here. And I've made a lot of them, and I'm really proud of them. What I've been told is that they would make for good keychains and sticker designs. And so I tried to do that. And here they are. I'm going to be opening a shop for them. There won't be much in stock, because I only have a couple, and, I can't afford to make that many. But if I make enough money on these ones, I can slowly upgrade how many I have per batch, and I think that's exciting. And, even more so, I can make more of these little tiny MCYT keychains for you guys, which I am massively looking forward to. Also, another idea that I had for a blind box idea, but I'm not going to tell you guys much about it yet, not until I get the full thing planned out. And I'm super excited to do it. And, I know you guys probably don't care, but I care. Obviously, links in the description. I hope you guys enjoy them. I think they're really cute. Even if no one buys these, I'm happy that I have them now for myself, because they're just that neat to me. But anyway, on to the actual video you're here for. Now before we get too into it, we gotta have a brief discussion of what an AU really is. I know it seems like a really stupid thing since most people know, but I'd like to clarify. AUs, or alternate universes, are exactly that. Alternate interpretations of characters in different things and whatever. You get the point. It's quite simple, really. And there's all kinds of different AUs. Some barely changing the context of the story at all, converting the story into a different story, seeing how well you can fit it into a different world, at least that's what I like to do, and others which completely change everything to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. And I have opinions on that. I might talk about them one day, but overall, just know my opinion is people should let's just let them have fun. But I personally really like AUs which stay close to the characters and how, the world is. Obviously, some deviations, they're fun, they're great, but I like to, keep certain things that remind you that, yeah, this is a fan thing. Like I said, personal preference. Some people like AUs that aren't afraid of being too different. Those aren't my AUs. And most importantly, I try to keep my, the heart of what's happening in said stories in the whole, fan thing I'm making. I think it just makes things consistent and makes it just feel more connected overall. But yeah, those are what AUs are. And obviously, if you're watching anything about Welcome Home AUs, you probably know about a couple yourself. There's a couple of really big ones out there. And yeah, I did realize nobody really makes videos about their AUs and stuff, and that's kind of why for a while I didn't think I could, but it's actually a really good idea. Hello, baby. And I feel like I will never get anywhere if I don't just tell people about my AUs. So yeah, that's why I am talking about them now. The Monster House AU is one of my less thought out AUs. Doesn't mean that it's not thought out. It kind of is unthought out, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's a fun AU to talk about, and it's a fun little thing to chew on in my brain, and I think it's neat, so I think it's still worth talking about. We'll talk about my more complicated AUs in a different video. Don't worry about it. But now, this AU, before I start talking about the characters and everything, I gotta talk about the world and, the kind of world they're in. So, it's kind of an old school kind of world, historical even. You go back in time a couple years, there's lots of forests, lots of people. Technology isn't all that thought out yet. Cool things like that. It doesn't take place in a puppet show at all. It takes place in kind of a real world situation. And in this world, there are monsters. All kinds of monsters. And monsters are usually creatures that are just, incredibly magic infused and do things that technically shouldn't exist. Most forms of science are technically magic in this world. But these are, actual magic, just people can't tell the difference yet. And each individual monster has its own way of working. I took my own personal headcanons for how certain monsters work. and put them into the story because I thought they were cool. And since monsters are like magic and tend to be a lot more powerful than your average human, they are feared, like super feared. And because they are feared, people want to kill them, obviously. If you're scared, defense is the only option you really have, I guess. And technically, lots of monsters don't mean any harm, like good chunks of them, but overall, like the very fact that they're more powerful than normal humans makes them terrified. And obviously, it's a historical kind of thing, and by historical, I mean I made it up and just picked and choose what I wanted to put in for it. They hate a bunch of other kinds of people as well. I feel like you could probably guess what I'm trying to say. It exists, I think it's going to exist in the original series, Welcome Home, but I just think it just adds a bit of an interesting flavor, I guess, to this AU, because it's kind of like an underlying thing already. I just want to make it clear as day. But yeah, it's a pretty fun AU, and I'm going to talk about the characters as they show up in the story. I feel like the best place to start in this AU is with our good old main character, Wally. In this AU, Wally is one of the few humans that are actually a part of it, and he's just a silly little guy, honest. However, he has no parents. For one reason or another, doesn't matter in this story. So when he was little, he was wandering in the woods and found a big old abandoned house. And I feel like you can all guess what this house is, you know, given the story. What Wally does, he enters the house and wanders around a bit, tries to find a nice place to stay. You know, it's getting dark, he has nowhere really to go. And while he's staying there, he realizes things about this building that aren't exactly normal. Of course, like, doors moving stuff can always be blamed on the wind, but turning on lights and stuff randomly tends to not be very common. And Wally throughout the story, his entire purpose is to be the most accepting person ever, because that's pretty much what he seems to be, I guess. Like, he doesn't care what you're doing, he just wants to have friends, he wants to have a good time. So, eventually, he learns a little fun fact about this house. It's a poltergeist. See, in this world, poltergeists are obviously a kind of ghost, but they don't really have a form at all. They just embody the entire structure, and that's what home is. Obviously, home can't really talk, so he talks with slamming doors and stuff after Wally finds out. Since the house can't introduce itself, Wally just decided to call him Home, because to Wally, that's what he is. And Home kind of becomes a father figure to Wally, and that is the basis of the story. This is where the whole thing starts. Just a silly little guy in his very sentient house. For our next character, we'll have to step away from home for a bit and go into a nearby village. One of the only villages nearby this giant house, although everyone there is pretty sure it's completely abandoned. In this town lives a little man. He's not a little man, he's a very big man, and overall is quite liked in this village. He's silly, charismatic, just a likable guy in general, and his name is Barnaby. In this AU, Barnaby is a werewolf, a very classic lad, and a very fitting one at that, and he went a very long time in his life without anyone realizing this. He inherited it from his mother, who is a werewolf elsewhere. I know she's not a werewolf in the story of Welcome Home, but I don't care. And so Barnaby's learned how to deal with it his entire life, making it hard to tell. All he has to do is stay inside his home, not let anyone over on full moons, and he's just completely fine. Although, his secret eventually gets outed by the town, and he has to flee, because obviously witch hunts and stuff. Or in this case, werewolf hunt. So Barnaby leaves his town and runs off into the forest, where he plans on staying in this abandoned house that he keeps hearing about. Once he gets there, he's surprised to find a small little man, who is actually a small little man this time. Barnaby's kind of afraid that the town sent somebody and they just managed to catch up to him somehow, but realizes it's not the case when Wally has no clue what he's on about or what's going on. But Wally does pick up on the fact that Barnaby is a werewolf. He kind of unintentionally points it out when panicking about being caught. Wally is unbothered and lets Barnaby stay there. This is why they're best friends. They're some of the first people that truly had each other and knew about each other's main secrets and stuff. Or at least Barnaby, that's how Barnaby is. Wally doesn't have that many secrets, not yet. Werewolves in this world act pretty normally, like other werewolves and stuff. They activate on full moons, they have a strange disliking for silver objects, you know, classic things like that. And in this AU, since it's a mansion that home is, every single person, instead of living in a neighborhood, they live in their own little rooms, or sometimes even their own little sections of the mansion, because how big it is. So obviously, Barnaby settles in, and they just kind of live on for a bit longer before meeting their next new little pal. Monsters tend to travel a lot. They don't tend to stay in one place most of the time, as doing so is very high risk for, death. At some point, a vampire stumbles across this old town where, Barnaby got ran out of for being a monster. And he sticks around a bit, learning about the natural life and stuff. Only really coming out at night, obviously, because he's a vampire. But also, people tend to bug him less when he's studying things like bugs and such. He tends to like visiting libraries, classic things that vampires do. And he learns that not too long ago, there was a witch hunt here. I'm using witch hunt as a catch-all term, by the way. I hope you noticed. And he gets an interest in leaving the town as soon as possible to prevent any suspicion onto him. Although he does realize that the person that they were hunting doesn't really have any signs of their death anywhere, meaning it's likely that they got away. So this vampire tends to just look around a bit, and it's nighttime, and he ends up finding this old haunted house. Although he doesn't know it's haunted yet. He ends up entering, looking around, and finding Barnaby. He really doesn't like Barnaby. He thinks he's been annoying very fast, and is about to leave until Wally shows up, which kind of catches him off guard since there's no sign of him being a monster at all. And Wally explains the whole situation. He's just some guy who just likes living, making friends, as you do, inviting people to live with you constantly. The vampire introduces himself as Frank, and appreciating the offer, and was originally not planning on taking it. Mostly out of paranoia, as he doesn't really trust humans that much, but very quickly realizes that Wally is fairly separated from the town and is currently living with two monsters. He realizes it's probably the only time and only chance he really has to settle down somewhere without constantly being running around and being super paranoid about everything. So he takes a chance and decides that he's gonna go, grab all of his things, and move in. And things stay pretty consistent. He really dislikes Barnaby, but he finds that Wally's calm nature and Holmes' sass kind of makes up for it. Besides, the library is massive, and home is full of spiders. And Frank's favorite kind of bug in this AU is spiders. And he lives comfortably for a while, until a new person comes into their lives, and Frank decides that staying around was the best choice he has ever made, because he finds a particular charm for this new friend of theirs. So, Wally's been living with Hope for a while now, long enough for Barnaby to come up with a fun little idea for Wally. Barnaby tells Wally that there is a postal service down in the town, and that he could probably register home as, a location where he lives, and since Wally's a human, they could probably get away with it. Wally doesn't entirely know how to do it, so Barnaby writes down an entire, step-by-step way to get it done. Especially without anyone knowing that other people live there. I mean, the only reason the house has been abandoned is because people think it's full of, dead, gross animals. They don't. There's other reasons. I'd not thought about it too hard, but those are the main ones in my mind. So, yeah, Wally decides, I'm gonna go do that. He goes down, gets it done, and heads back. Obviously, they start getting some mail. Lots of it is, advertisements and little invitations to fun little events in the town, since it's close enough they consider it to be a part of there. Besides, the people in this village want to meet this mysterious man living off in the giant house in the woods. One day, one of the delivery men is off delivering a package all over the town and has to make the trek all the way out to this little isolated mansion. I mean, he's delivered things there before, not very often, but he has, and he gets up there. Obviously, he knocks on the door, but Wally doesn't answer. Turns out they forgot to inform Frank about the new mail service, so Frank was just going to open it. He did, and came face to face with a tall man who was incredibly well kept. He's obviously just a simple human, no signs of any monster, anything. It doesn't take this mailman too long to realize that this is a house full of monsters. Not of Frank's fault or anything, more the fact that the guy that they're trying to burn at the stake a few days ago, or weeks ago at this point, is kind of just in the background, just eating food and chilling, and this man starts to panic, but it's a bit too late. He gets pulled into the house by Home and cannot get out, and they have to convince him to just chill out. They're not going to hurt him. Nothing's bad going to happen. And he is so freaked out at first. But after meeting another human, Wally, and starting to get to know these monsters a tiny bit better, even if a bit against his will, he finally calms down and introduces himself to them. Of course, after they introduce themselves first. But he introduces himself as Eddie. After they finally convinced Eddie to just not mention the fact that monsters live there at all, Eddie agrees, heads off. He just stands by his word. He just goes off delivering his mail to other people. And this time, he starts, like, going there on purpose, actively befriending these monsters, because they're pretty chill people, like, overall, and ends up becoming so attached to them that he considers moving in with them. He doesn't right away. He thinks about it for a very long time. But he eventually does, and he gets a little room right near Frank's, and it's all history from there. Obviously, as stated, Eddie is a human, and I just want to make this obvious as possible. Eddie and Frank become a couple very early on, or not a couple exactly, at least not officially. They become close enough that you'd think they're a couple right away, but due to certain things in this world, they kind of don't exactly acknowledge it right away, but that's definitely what happens. It takes a little while, but they do end up meeting a new friend who happens to come to the house on their own accord, although not entirely aware of the entire situation going on. So, just a heads up, this next character is an entirely unique kind of creature, based on, like, a classic monster. That's all you need to know. I might make a video about them in the future, since these monsters are very consistent throughout my stories. And it's even, like, heavily connected to my main persona, so, yeah, you'll have to get used to it. Just fill in the gaps if you get too confused. So, at this point, the entire village is starting to realize that there's some people that are living out in that little secluded area, since they got, mail delivering there and stuff, classic things. But other monsters also hear of this, especially monsters living in the town. One of these monsters hears about this story and decides, it's probably really smart if I went and lived under the bed and in the closet of this isolated person's house. I mean, it'll be harder for me to be caught. So this monster, in the dead of night, leaves its original home, traveling off to this house. Although once it gets in, it doesn't really take very long to be caught with how many people are living there at that point. Obviously, they're all ecstatic to have this new friend there, and the monster's a little confused. Although, it adapts very fast and decides, you know what? Who am I to complain? Look at these guys. They're amazing. They're fun. And she instantly gets attached to a good chunk of them. She introduces herself as Julie and goes on just living her best life. Although she realizes quickly that she still has to go to the town to feed, as the one human that lives there doesn't exactly sleep very often. So she can't really feed off dreams the same way she could before. Although she always returns back to the mansion where all of her friends are. In fact, she even sends out messages to her family letting them know that, hey, I live here now and it's great. It's not too far out of town and it's harder to get caught. So Julie just lives happily there with all of her new friends. Of course, she's not the only new friend they have in this story, as there's others to come. After Julie started sending letters out to her family, everything about the monster house started getting out, at least to the monsters. They heard that there's a human who's taking care of a bunch of monsters and treating them like people, and there's a good chunk of them living in one place, at least compared to how many monsters usually hang out together. All these messages, things that you could ever talk about this lovely little house, made it to a little old witch who often lived alone, despite how much she hated it. She heard about this and was like, oh, well, it's probably worth going and checking out. I mean, who wouldn't want to meet me, of all people? The witch went on a journey, eventually coming across the town. Obviously, not spending much time there as it's not her objective, ending up knocking on the front door of this mansion and professionally introducing herself as Sally Starlet. She wished to put on a performance for them, since she's not seen so many monsters in one place before, at least not like this. And all the monsters let her in. It was like, go ahead, show us what you can do. This witch Sally performs the best performance she ever could, making sure to get the best experience for everyone involved. And everyone loved it, and so did she. To the point where she's like, it's hard to get big crowds of people, at least of people who respect me and what I do, in one place. I think I'll just stay here. I'm sure other monsters will find interest in this house, and I can perform to them and they come to us. She ended up settling in, living normally, and is one of the few people who can actually go into town and buy things without, being called out for being inhuman. The arrival of this performative, lovely actress ended up causing more interest in the whole situation, as it's no longer just a couple of people living together, but they'll do things like performances. They'll make things for you. They'll be very kind, thus calling the attention of all kinds of other monsters, including some new friends to come. One day, word of the mansion spread across the land, specifically to a kind harpy lady. She heard of this fun little place that she could call safe home, and wished nothing more than to see it for herself. She packed up all the things she had, and journeyed down. Of course, she had to stealth a lot more than some of the other people, since harpies can't exactly change their form or anything. Eventually she got there, and as she approached, she got a little worried and scared that maybe it's not as good as the stories have told. As she was about to back out, Sally spotted her, introducing herself, and the harpy introduced herself as Poppy. Sally took Poppy inside, introduced her to everyone. It didn't take very long for Poppy to be part of the group, but she greatly appreciated it anyway. She got into baking, and it's one of her favorite activities to do. So for the final welcome home character that I want to discuss, I've got to discuss my personal headcanons on how zombies work. I don't know how important this knowledge is to the story. I personally just want to talk about it, but I feel like it'll build a little interest just overall. So personally, how I imagine zombies working, when a person dies, they're kind of just dead, like perma-dead. But zombies are more just like a separate creature that comes to life from your dead corpse, and that's the best way I can describe it. Quite simple, but I quite like the headcanon. I use it for many different stories. But yeah, now I will continue on with the next part. Zombies are rather rare monsters. Most of them come into life very late, and though they have fully constructed brains by the time they come into existence, they are not aware of how the world works. And though they can learn very fast about certain things like language, they don't have enough time to learn that humans are dangerous and will kill them. So most don't even make it for very long. Except for this one zombie. He relies entirely on trading to ensure his own survival. Although he's quite generous and will just trade for stories and information when given the chance. And since zombies don't really have anyone that they are, family with or anything, whenever they meet another zombie like themselves, they just decide that they're all family. Every last zombie that lives to this day. This zombie, as well, likes to write down all the names of all of his family that he meets, in hopes that he will see them again, and telling them everything he knows in hopes that they can survive as long as he has. There are times where this zombie has been put into corners, but has been able to trade his way out of it with other humans, with how many valuable things he often has on him. Although he tends to avoid trading with humans just to remain safe. I mean, he doesn't know how a human's going to react at any given moment. He's only ever been lucky up until this point. One day, during his journeying, he's heard stories about all kinds of monster houses and things like that. He finds them very entertaining, and amused by the fact that they're apparently very real and that people have even seen it. Although, this zombie has no direct interest in visiting there. Not yet, at least. Although, on his journeys, he eventually bumps into a small town, which of course he tends to avoid and doesn't really enter. He decides to set up in a cave out nearby it, in hopes of seeing some monsters nearby that he might be able to trade with. But while he's doing his old trading setup thing, a human comes out of town. The zombie tries to hide, but it doesn't take very long for the human to see him. The human walks over, introduces himself to the zombie, of course very timidly since he doesn't really talk to other monsters that he's not met before, and says that his name is Eddie, and that he's the neighborhood mailman and all that stuff. Howdy's a bit confused why he's so kind, when Eddie repeats the story of the monster house, and that he's friends with the monsters in there even though most people in the town isn't, or aren't. The zombie becomes a lot more interested in the story with how close he is to it, and decides that, hey, maybe I can come see this little mansion. I mean, I'm nearby, right? So Eddie takes him all the way down to the mansion, where he introduces the zombie to everyone else in the mansion. The zombie introduces himself as Howdy, and although he wasn't planning on staying, he realizes that, yeah, he loves selling things. It's a very fun thing to do, but it's entirely based on survival, and he's getting a little tired of constantly being on the move. He asks if he can stay and if he can set up a shop inside the mansion somewhere where people could visit, and everyone gets really excited. They're happy to have more friends, and this zombie is flattered. He's happy to have all kinds of friends and family now that he can just rely on and learn from. So I feel like I should now just talk about the main premise that the story was going to have. And it's quite a simple one. Pretty much a hot tourist destination for monsters. Because think about it. They got the host Wally. They got the jester Barnaby. They got their little performer Sally. They got a baker who makes goods and foods and stuff. That's Poppy. And then you got Howdy, who just sells little trinkets and stuff. And there's other things that the other guys can do, I'm sure. Like Sally can teach gardening or something. I don't know. She's the one who would teach gardening. And Frank can talk about bugs a lot. He loves bugs, so who would even stop him? I love bugs. I'd listen to him talk about bugs forever. And like I said, it's quite simple. It's one of my less fleshed out AUs, but I do really like it. It's fun, and I feel like I could build on it a lot more. And I'm excited to do so if I ever get around to it. I have far too many ideas that I might never get around to it, but I'm sure it's fine. I didn't really touch on the family characters that much, so I'm just gonna build on them a tiny bit. Although I don't have much, I'm just gonna improv mostly. There's not gonna be much to say. But yeah, there's Barnaby's mom, who is also a werewolf, and she was just able to live out her entire life not having people know she was a werewolf. Like, even when Barnaby was figured out, they mostly just assumed it was the father who had the problem. They don't even know who Barnaby's father is, so yeah, she's still safe. There's Sally's siblings, but they're just kind of living in the town still. They don't really want to move into the mansion. They don't feel like it. They have their own things they're doing. And obviously the Howdy family is just like, I decided to just make it into every single zombie is Howdy's sibling, or family member at least. So I feel like that was a good way to incorporate it when zombies don't really have families, you know? Especially in my headcanon for them. But yeah, they're really fun. I quite like their ideas. Although simple and yeah. So that's pretty much just the basics of the entire AU. Or just the entire AU, I guess, because it's not very well built up, like I said, unlike some of my other AUs. But I quite like it. It's a fun AU to play with. The interactions are different, and I like how I got to really play with how the characters look. Because how these characters would act if they were, like, had these monsters and those specific weaknesses is fun to think about. And it was just really good to do overall. It's fun to talk about these things. I'm gonna do more later. Yeah. I do have another video planned for the Welcome Home AUs. Like, I'm doing my Black Hole AU next, and I'm really attached to my Black Hole AU. Not as bad as my Magicka AU, but I am still really attached to it. I really like it. And I feel like you guys will too. I actually have a couple drawings for it, so I can, like, I don't have to make new drawings for the entire AU, but I probably will anyway when I get there. Although I will say, after this Monster AU video, there might be a break from a break from Welcome Home AUs. And if it's not a break from Welcome Home AUs after this video, it's going to be the one after next video, like after the Black Hole one. That'll be fun. So subscribe to me if you want to see more videos where I make a fool out of myself and you guys can realize how inconsistent my channel is. Have fun with that. Follow me on Twitter. I post art there, as well as Tumblr. I like Tumblr more, actually. I don't know. I didn't used to, but I think I'm more attached to it now. I might be able to leave Twitter soon. I'm slowly ceasing my addiction. And I hope you guys enjoyed your stay. I hope you want to look at the shops and support me financially. I have no real rewards or anything right now, so I hope you still appreciate it. Anyway, goodbye everybody. Have a good one.